So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Bonar Institute webinar. As you know, we are featuring Lalith Gunaratne, who is an associate of the Bonar Institute. I will ask Lalith later to provide his own introduction because Lalith's background is impressive and wide, ranging from the scientific to the spiritual, merging East and West in solving wicked problems. As you know, the webinar title today is Radical Uncertainty and Wicked Problems, How Can Mindfulness Help? And when I think on the theme of mindfulness, it reminds me of the purpose of the Bonar Institute. And in that light, I'd like to ask the CEO and founder of the Bonar Institute, James DeGaspe Bonar, to say a few words about the Institute and then introduce Lalith from his perspective. So, James.
Thank you very much, John and Lalith and everybody else. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. Just a few words about the Bonar Institute. We partner with high growth companies to optimize board and executive talent through purpose. We define purposeful leadership as an ethical choice that principal leaders make to achieve something greater than themselves and the companies that they lead. So you can understand why we are so thrilled to welcome Lalith to give a talk on mindfulness, the impact of mindfulness and the need for mindfulness. Lalith, it is with great pleasure and anticipation that we welcome you. You are a kindred spirit, a valued associate, and a dear friend. So Lalith, over to you.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you, John, for hosting the webinar. This is such a pleasure to tackle a subject that is radical in its own way and complex. And I have, I guess, by way of introduction, I'm not going to really introduce myself as such, but I guess in how I'm going to present myself and the stories that I'm going to bring to bear will explain where I'm coming from. I bring in the practice of mindfulness from a practice that I learned as a kid, and that I'm so thrilled that mindfulness now is accepted as mainstream. But still, I would say, if you use the word mindfulness, 70% of the people out there, especially in the business world, will roll their eyes and glaze over. So that's the conditioning that's there. But what I'm excited about is the tremendous research that has gone on in the last, I would say, 25 years in bringing mindfulness in alignment with research in neuroscience, in bringing in evolutionary biology, bringing in psychology and psychiatry, and the practice of psychology and psychiatry in that process too, in making mindfulness a part of an integral part that is important for the modern lives that we are facing, lives which have got so fast around us and become complex. So everything is now volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and hence creating the wicked problems that we are seeing out there. So why is leadership important? Because at the end of the day, it's leadership that drives the world, isn't it? And what we are seeing out there right now in terms of the conflicts, in terms of dysfunctions, in terms of the fractures that we are seeing on this earth, through the separation of the mind and the body, I feel, is really what we are facing now as these radical uncertainties. And when the human being evolved 200,000 years ago, that's when we started creating the radical uncertainties with I guess the stone and the hammer, and then other technologies emerged in. So in terms of how leadership has played a role in that process, as we evolved as a humanity through the agri-age, then through the industrial age, and now the age of technology, where we clearly are out of our depth right now, what we have created. We came out of our depth, I think, when we split the atom. Splitting the atom gave us a technology that we can annihilate ourselves with, and it's looming over us right now. And with with an emerging war in the Middle East and what happened in Russia and Ukraine and all the other little wars that are around, that are driven by an industry that is self-serving, is really instrumental in seeing the way the world is now evolving. So this is why leadership is so important. It's so important to evolve the mind in a way because the fact that it is our mind that is driving this process in the way it is doing right now in the world. So how can we change our minds in a way to find ourselves more grounded? And I use the word spirituality and sacred freely here, because if we look at the history of the world and how that trajectory happened to create the modern world, starting from Athens, because it's important for us to look at the past in order to figure out the future, and how it evolved in a way where we got, I guess, cornered into thinking from the left side of the brain. And modern neuroscience is now validating the left and the right hemisphere and its roles even more as things unfold right now, which is very exciting for us to see. So if you look at what happened with the Cartesian duality, as science was evolving, the church talked about the flat earth and the human being at the top of the heap and ruling the roost, and ruling over all the lesser sentient beings. That was now eroded by Copernicus coming and talking about a heliocentric universe. And Giordano Bruno ends up getting burnt at the stake, and Galileo pushed the boundaries and ended up in jail in 1633. But then the scientific community and the spiritual community the humanities community decided that they're going to call it a truce. So people like Descartes came up with this notion of the separation of the mind and the body, enabled the humanities and the spiritual and the sacred to go on in one direction, the logical, rational reasoning, objective, technology-oriented scientific thought to go on one side. So this separation of the mind and the body seems to be one of the biggest issues that we're facing now in the world, where the corporate world is run month by month on quarterly profit, and there's a sense of expediency in the name of efficiency that has come up, that is driving the whole world right now, because there's a corporate political nexus that is also in the world. So how do we then bring leadership to become aware of this? Because this is a huge blind spot that is there as a result of that historical process that has come about, where most of us have got stuck on the left side of the brain. And if we've grown up in an urban environment where we went to a Western style school, our parents started off by saying, you better go pass your exams, do this and come on top of class, and then get a job, and that's the way we are motivated, through fear. And so naturally we go to the left side of the brain, which drives us to be objective oriented, to be strategic, to be efficient and effective in whatever we do. And all of that also comes at the price of us becoming manipulative too, if we don't get our own way. And the left side of the brain, now we understand, is tyrannical to us, scolds us all the time, doubts us, and that inner conflict, the inner violence, is spilling over to the outside world. The left side of the brain also likes to hinge and anchor on certain ideologies, and they come from our original conditioning from our parents. And they may be religious ideologies based on our race and nationality, and all of those things then create an attachment to those ideologies, that now if somebody insults it or impinges on it, that you need to now react to it. And that's when the retribution and the revenge comes in, because that's such a strong emotion in us too, which is a survival emotion. So all of that comes out unabated, uncontrolled, as a result of what we're facing out there. And the fact that we are now mostly stuck on the left side of the brain. So all of this was confirmed. Also, if you look at how the industrial age started in the 1700s, and economists, Adam Smith wrote the book Wealth of Nations. And in that book, we talked about, again, following that trajectory of individualism, objective thought. Wealth of Nation expounded on that free market principles, which didn't involve anything to do with the human emotion, human mind. But he did write another book which was conveniently ignored, which was Theory of Moral Sentiments, which talked about our evolutionary biology, the fact that when we evolved 200,000 years ago, we won't be here today if not for altruism, empathy, kindness, the mother-child, unconditional love, all of that. At the same time, there's this other part of our brain, which is survival, which can kill. So we have this dichotomy, we have this tension between these two sides, and we tend to be now stuck on that other side, the left side, which is zero sum, diminishing returns. And this is what we're seeing out there. So there's a leadership crisis, as you see out there, that really we need to address that. Or we have historical reasons as to why we need to address that, because we saw how empires fell when it got punitive, when it started trying to control its population, when the leaders of these people in these leadership positions, people in power, became scared, tried to then micromanage situations. And this is a kind of society that we are now seeing evolving through the politics that we are seeing, because the politicians who we have given power to are just like us. They just don't know what they're doing themselves. How can they? The world has got so complex. So this primitive mind now is encountering a new technology in artificial intelligence. And how is that technology going to manage, as the horse is bolted now, with this primitive mind and a system of democracy that was created based on a Magna Carta? So that democracy is too old to handle the pace of development that's taking place. So what are we going to do? So for me, this is an inquiry. This has been a lifetime inquiry, because of the notion of uncertainty is been with me as a result of some changes that happened to my life when I was a 12-year-old living in Sri Lanka. So my innocence was taken away from me as a 12-year-old when a coordinated attack of 108 police stations happened by a bunch of disenfranchised youth in Sri Lanka, inspired by Che Guevara. And that happened on April 5th, 5 days before my 12th birthday. And I was horrified, yet I was fascinated. My innocence was lost. But I was fascinated by this concerted, coordinated attack, and I was interested in who led this, how did this happen? And I spoke to my father. I was an incorrigible kid. I was curious. I was always asking questions, and part of the reason is I believe I'm on the spectrum of attention deficit, so I'm all over the map. So I was so interested in the area of leadership. As a result, I started reading about politics as a 13-year-old. And then another thing that happened to me as a 12-year-old, as I went to my Buddhist Sunday school, a Buddhist monk told me the 3 characteristics of life. He said the first one is that life is impermanent and uncertain, and that impermanence and uncertainty affects us as human beings, because one part of us likes permanence and don't like change. So we like to hang on to things. So as I said earlier, as a child, I'm hanging on to my parents, and I remember feeling upset when my father would take off out of the house for 2-3 days of contemplating a loss of that. So that attachment and the suffering I felt. So the second truth he said was that there's suffering as a result of our attachments. And then he said the third truth was there's no such thing called self. For me, as a 12-year-old, I thought, well, how can that be? I'm here, I'm thinking, I'm feeling my body. But in the last 50 years plus years of this inquiry, I'm seeing the truth to that, because our life is moving in that direction of impermanence and uncertainty. Because this body is born, it'll grow and it'll die out. So that truth for me is now 100% apparent. However, the monk also told me that there's a practice, if we understand intrinsically about these three truths based on, then he talked about Four Noble Truths. What is that? He said there is suffering, we have to accept that, and then the notion that that suffering can be stopped or quelled, or we can deal with that suffering. And I was told that it is non-attachment. Now again, for a 12-year-old kid, how can you be not attached to things, right? But it pointed me in the direction of what's called the Noble Eightfold Pathway, based on three principles. And the first principle was first to understand the nature of life. Take a deep dive into understanding the nature of life, my interconnected nature with the universe, with this earth, and the nature of the mind, and how does that mind go? And my mind as it is was, I'm attached to my parents, I'm attached to my family, I'm attached to my home, I'm attached to my, at the time I loved little cars, my dinky toys. So all of those attachments then was apparently bringing me some potential suffering, because I'd lose that at some day. So to understand that, so it was called understanding, the right understanding and right awareness and right knowing. And to do that, he told me that I have to quiet my mind and concentrate and stop the thought process, go inward, and stop seeking solutions in the outside world, because you have the solutions internally. And he said, so it comes through meditation, by quietening the mind. So meditation, then he said, as you're breathing in and breathing out, imagine where that breath is coming from. It comes from a tree and the soil on this earth. Imagine where your breath now goes out as food for the tree and this earth. Then he said, so you see, this is a symbiotic relationship with you and nature, can never be broken. And that understanding is the way when we live. Finally, he said there's a moral compass that we all have that's now been confirmed by people like Professor E.O. Wilson in his work on evolutionary biology, and others who have now, like Wade Campbell, the Canadian anthropologist, who are now confirming the fact that it was altruism and empathy that, as I said earlier, that has evolved us. So what he said was, we have to have compassion towards ourselves, to the suffering that we have, first of all, and that suffering is caused, to understand where that suffering is caused by. So how can I slowly let go of that suffering? And I may not be able to do that in this lifetime, but that journey itself then creates a mindful awareness about how things work around us. It helps us now through modern neuroscience. I'm learning with people like amazing research by people like Dr. Ian McGilchrist, a Scottish psychiatrist and researcher and neuroscientist. His latest book is called, what's it called? Emissary. What's Master and the Emissary? Yes. And then people like Jill Bolte Taylor, the Harvard neuroscientist who had a stroke when she was 37 years old. So she became an object of study of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So she got her fame by doing a TED talk called My Stroke of Insight, and she wrote her latest book called Whole Brain Living. So all of these things are now pointing towards a process where we can perhaps manage what's going on around us by managing our minds. The radical uncertainty and the wicked problems that seem intractable, seem extremely complex and difficult to grasp. And you know, all you have to just look at is, we don't know how the Middle Eastern situation is going to end up. We have no idea. It's so complex. And that complexity arises from the fact that the human beings are so emotional and bought into a certain ideology, and they're pushing it without compromise. So it probably could be solved if we learn to take a deep breath and say, observe, and put some perspective into the situation. So what I want to do is to involve you in a little bit of a process. And that process is simply to ask you to just take a breath, focus on your breath for a moment. And if you have a piece of paper and a pen, write down what's going on in your mind right now in terms of Any thoughts, any emotions, any feelings, just write it down. So it could be curiosity, you're happy to be here, you're feeling relaxed and calm as you're seated there. It could be, I'm a bit anxious about something, I cannot quite get a hold of it. I'm not sure what it is. It could be a fear or upset from an argument that you had just before coming here. And now, just with what you wrote down, just take a check in your body. Start from your feet as you're seated there and move up the body along your legs. So see whether there's any tension in your body. How about your back? Is it hurting? The pit of your stomach, is there any nervous energy there in the pit of your stomach? As you move up your chest, is it feeling tight? And see whether you can feel your heartbeat. Just quiet your mind to see how it's beating. Is it beating fast? Is it medium? Is it slow? Then your throat area, your neck and shoulders, is it tight? Is it tense? Is your throat constricted? Then as you move up your jaw and to your eyes and your forehead, just check and see whether there's any tension anywhere. Now I invite you to take a deep breath. Now, this deep breath, I invite you to just breathe right all the way into your toes. So a deep, intentional, strong breath. And as you're breathing in, say observe at the end, and then breathe out the same way, slow, deep breath, emptying your whole system of all the carbon dioxide. So let's do that deep breath a couple of times. Release as you're breathing out. And feel and see whether some of those tensions that may have been there in the body, are you able to dissipate some of that through this breath? Now I invite you to close your eyes and see how the awareness changes. The hearing side, the auditory side of your skin is feeling the temperature better. You're hearing more acutely now. You're tasting your mouth. So you became aware, you went inward. And keep that breath coming in and out with your eyes closed. And watch you going inside your body, to the inner core of your body, to acknowledge your cells and acknowledge your entire body with this oxygen that you're breathing in and breathing out the carbon dioxide. And as you're breathing in and breathing out, you're also aware of your symbiotic relationship to this earth, because you are one with nature. You're this earth. I invite you to now slow your breath down to your normal breath. Keep that focus and bring that focus to the tip of your nostril and feel the air going in and out of your body from the tip of your nostril. So what you did just now, you may open your eyes now and see whether you can keep that focus on your breath going for the rest of the time, perhaps the rest of the day if you can. You may have got lost in thought halfway through. That's okay. That's part of getting a hold of that breath, building that mental muscle to tame the mind, which is incorrigible. It's like a 2-year-old child which is going all over the place, and you're bringing that child onto your lap and soothing it and quietening it down. You're quietening the mind down. So you shut out the past, you shut out the future, you became present to the here and now. And if you were feeling some tension, a burning sense of anxiety that was happening, you were able to now perhaps quell that anxiety, because what you did was you took intentional action. Your brain now found out as soon as you took a hold of your breath that you took control of the situation. It's like a pilot taking control of the plane when you hit turbulence. So as soon as you take a deep breath and say, observe, that's what you're doing. And there's a nerve called the vagus nerve that controls the autonomic nervous system. It operates on autopilot most of the time. So when something happens to us, something threatens us, it reacts in quick time. So what happens is, just to break that down, so I use a metaphor of 3 arrows. So the first arrow is something that I have no control over. Somebody says something to you that upsets you. Somebody cuts you off on the road. That's the first arrow. So can I train myself to catch the second arrow, which is going into my mind and waking up my ego and reacting to the situation? So in psychological terms, in the mentalization process, what happened is, as the first impression happened, it's the first impression, the impression. Then in milliseconds, you're going to interpret it by going into your Rolodex of the memory card and say, okay, last time this happened, this is what happened. So it happens in a millisecond, the interpretation of it. Then you're going to, so that interpretation is going to give rise to a feeling. And that feeling is going to give rise to an emotion. And then the third one is the felt meaning of what just happened. And again, that depends on what my ideologies are, what my conditioned dogmas are, what I'm holding on to. Has somebody impinged on that, and then I'm reacting on autopilot. So the felt meaning then continues on to taking action. So the reaction happens, and all of these things happen in just milliseconds. So if I can catch that second arrow before it comes in, by training my mind, by taking a deep breath, and it doesn't happen overnight, and saying observe, then I've stopped it from going in, because the third arrow comes in after that, which is a mood that will set in for the rest of the day. And there's a bunch of stress hormones that will come into your body if you allow it to happen, and your heart rate will go up, blood pressure will go up, your stomach will stop producing, stomach will stop digesting food. So all of those things are going to constrict you, bring you down, so close your mind and get to the left side of the brain to react and hit out rather than. So if I take a deep breath, what happened is I got a hold of my autonomic nervous system. I went to the place called the parasympathetic nervous system, as opposed to the sympathetic nervous system, which is aligned with the left hemisphere of the brain. I got to the right hemisphere of the brain and became whole brain. So when I get to the right hemisphere of the brain, what happens is that I gain perspective. I can see things clearly. I can control the left brain if I allow it. But right now, when we are conditioned where the left brain is the master, it doesn't allow me to even access the right brain. So that's where the practice needs to happen. So people like Ian McGilchrist and other neuroscientists, and there are a host of others joining in who's doing a tremendous amount of research on mindfulness, are now saying, even Jill Bolte-Taylor is saying, it's a meditation practice. Getting a hold of the breath, our life force, is the first step to get a hold of the brain and to say to the left brain, shut up, leave it alone now. I'm going to get to the other side. And then let that become the master to run the whole brain by putting things in perspective. So the right side of the brain is then trusting the universe. It's compassion, it's love, it's open-ended. It's not micromanaging anything. It's love and then compassion. So that's the way I see as a way for us to be able to get a hold of what's going on as best as we can as things are unfolding around us. Because we need to be able to think critically. For us to think critically with these radical problems and radical uncertainties, and the first step right now is the fact that the organizational development, organizational education and research institutions are now giving it names, because all this time we have hinged ourselves on a perfect science of economics, for instance, that has been sold to us since Adam Smith came up with the theories. People like Hayek and Friedman and Keynes talked about economics, which is separated from the mind and the body, separated from emotion. And there are certain certainties that is espoused through that process, that if you do this, this will happen, and we are good to go. But to realize that, yes, when I press this button, something else will happen, but something else will happen somewhere else. So how do we bring our critical thinking faculties? By quietening my mind, by taking a deep breath. And that then becomes part of the process of then getting a hold of the mind to think critically. But thinking critically when these wicked problems and radical uncertainties are abound is crucial for us, because we need to stop our thought process. We need to get out of our left brain, get to the right brain, and be able to put things in perspective. And then we can ask the question, what is going on here, by gaining that space. And then ask the second question, how is this happening? And those questions are essentially left brain oriented to get a hold of this situation. So it's not shutting down the left brain. Our strategic mind thinking mind has to be alive and well to be functioning as a whole person. Then we ask the third question, why is this happening? That's when we can get to the root cause. When we ask why 3-4 times, we'll get to root cause. But what will enable us to do that is to shut the left brain down and go whole brain. And for me, this is incredibly exciting because of another reason. Because halfway through my life experience, I ended up studying engineering. And one of the subjects that I learned, which then saw congruence with the Buddhist teachings that I saw of impermanence and uncertainty, was the first law of thermodynamics, which said the law of conservation of mass and energy, which says that this universe has a finite closed loop system where energy cannot be put in nor released. So that's fine and good. But the second law is the clincher. That's when it says, okay, hang on a minute, don't get comfortable. The second law says the universe moves from order to disorder and equilibrium. So there was equilibrium as the universe was formed, and then there was order, and then there's the law of entropy, where more we live, the entropy grows and grows. So uncertainty and disorder will grow more and more as we live on this earth. And eventually the universe will blow itself out from and find that equilibrium. So if you look at it at a micro level in our body, that's exactly what happens. We are born out of an order, and as we grow, that disorder happens between us. And eventually that entropy will end up in finding equilibrium in our death. So this is what science tells us now. And the more we live on this earth, so the entropy really started by us as hunter-gatherers starting the stone tools. And then we started organizing ourselves as farmers and in our agricultural processes, where we started interfering with this earth. So we started disturbing the earth, creating more entropy. So entropy is also digging up that fossil that was buried as a former tree underground and bringing out, using work and using energy to bring it out, and then fire it and use it for energy. So you're shifting the energy from order to disorder in terms of entropy. And the more we live, the more we grow, the more technology we bring to bear, we're going to create more and more disorder on this earth. And that's a given now. We have to. How are we going to deal with that? In the 1960s, there was a person called D. Hawk, came from a farming family in Utah. He was a banker in Bank of America. He was asked to establish a credit card in the 1960s. And being a farmer, he knew the loss of entropy, loss of disorder. So he needed to now create a system in the money business, which needed to have governance and controls. But at the same time, he knew that you cannot control everything 100%. Everything is chaos most of the time, and we get anchors of control only a little bit at a time. So he coined this word called chaotic theory. So he established the Visa empire in 1968, I believe, which is now an $11 trillion entity. We don't even know where the head office of Visa is. It's there. So he decentralized the operation, set some controls, but enabled the community to establish that card by putting some principles, governance procedures, but then let it go. and let it grow on its own. Check him out, D Hawk. He's passed away recently. He's a fascinating guy. If you just Google him, he has amazing stories that he talks about along these lines. So this is the kind of wisdom that we need right now at this hour when there's so much of chaos around us, to get a hold of our minds, because when we are still stuck on the left side of the brain, and when we even attempt to get to the right side of the brain, sitting in front of a fireplace just to relax at the end of a hard day, what happens to your mind? Right? It gets called back constantly. Left brain is beckoning you back. What are you doing? Wasting time. Come on, do something. You got to do that. You got to do that. That checklist keeps coming up in our heads. So all of those things are creating this conflict in our brains. We are not allowed to do it on our own. So then the only way we can quiet our mind is to get inebriated, and that doesn't help because we have a big hangover the next day, right? So that's the way we are finding ways to shut our mind down. So I am proposing that let's learn to shut our mind down by bringing the breath as a tool, making the breath my best friend, learning at the heat of the moment to be able to say, breathe and observe, but it doesn't happen overnight. So in a society where we are used to instant gratification, instant solutions, you press a button, and I'm our two sons are both AI experts, but I've never opened a chat GPT in my life still. I'm resisting it because I'm somehow the thinking that it'll take my creativity away, take my human imperfection away if I use these technologies. And this human imperfection is what is still needed to live out our lives with nature, acknowledging nature as best as we can to keep this earth going without diminishing it by a group of people who are creating new technologies, who are managing this earth, but who seem to be stuck on the left brain, but who now clearly don't know what they're doing from what we are seeing out there. So how do we manage ourselves? So I say we need to start that individually first. We need to look at ourselves first. We need to put a mirror on ourselves first. And for me, the mindfulness practice is, I'm not going to go through what it entails because there's so much out there to learn the practice, but it needs a daily practice. Now, for us leaders out there, facing these radical problems, facing these intractable issues that we're facing on a day-to-day basis, we need to find that daily time, to find that quiet time. I'm a bit extreme. I have 2 hours. And that 2 hours is my addiction. I need it because the rest of the day goes crazy for me with all the different things that I'm doing. But that discipline is there. It has been there since I was a 12-year-old. And that has held me in good stead through a tumultuous life, living life through in Sri Lanka, growing up, and then moving to Canada as a teenager, and then going back to Sri Lanka and starting a business in the middle of an insurgency and a war where we had to cope with the best in people and the worst in people, and cope with death being around the corner. So for me, the way I survived, I know, is through my mindfulness practice. At least I got some sanity into my worrying, anxious mind, even for a few moments, to give me some grounding so I can think clearly, put things in perspective, think critically, ask those questions properly, and then also learn to collaborate with others, get off a high horse as a leader. I don't need to know all the answers. And part of my education has been also to really study not only mindfulness, but leadership from just reading about all kinds of leaders, including Kennedy, Hitler, including Gandhi, all of those people, just to understand what made them tick, because they held such a huge responsibility for all of us out there in the world. So I think I'm going to end here, and I would welcome, we have about 20 minutes left. Thank you for your patient hearing. I hope I was able to provoke some thought, and I gave you a few names to check on. I also want to say, please don't take my word as I say it, because what I learned through the Buddhist teaching is that it was not dogma. It was not ideology. I was told, practice it for yourself and find out for yourself. And your practice is your own practice. So that daily practice became a part of that practice to understand, go into the mind and figure it out. And I'm still a very imperfect being as I am right now. And I say that with humility. And it's the community that I have that I can work with, and I have the privilege of working with, that we can grow with. So thank you very much, John, for the opportunity, and James.
So thank you very much, Lalith, for today's webinar.